Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with political and PR consultant Leon Emirali and journalist and author Christina Patterson. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, The Observer leads on Professor Ara Darzi's report into the NHS, which has found the UK was hit harder by COVID than other countries, in part because of the previous government's health policies. The Sunday Telegraph claims that the BBC has breached its editorial guidelines more than 1,500 times over the war in Gaza. The Sunday Express says cutting winter fuel payments could be the Labour government's downfall, comparing it to Margaret Thatcher's poll tax. While the Mail on Sunday warns the Chancellor could be planning what the paper calls a welter of tax rises in next month's budget. The Sunday Times reports on an investigation into a surgeon at Great Ormond Street Hospital after nearly 24 children were allegedly harmed. If you didn't manage to get Oasis tickets, you might be able to try again if you don't mind crossing the Atlantic. The Sunday Mirror says the Gallagher brothers have verbally agreed to perform in the United States. And the headline of the Daily Star on Sunday, Oi, get your round in Pinocchio. It cites a study claiming men with large noses are more likely to duck buying their round of drinks at the pub. They didn't actually use the word boffins this time round, but that is a serious story, apparently. A reminder that by scanning the QR codes you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Leon Emirali and Christina Patterson. Welcome to both of you. Needless to say, we won't be covering that story, in case you were wondering. Let's start with The Observer and more serious matters. And this is the report, as mentioned in the rundown of the papers, by Professor Ara Darzi into the state of the NHS and the consequences of the COVID crisis. Christina.
Yes, well, I must say that this has been... Wes Streeting commissioned this report shortly after he became Health Secretary, after this government came to power. And Lord Darzi has completed it in record time. When you think how long government reports normally take, so extremely swift. And it's no great surprise to hear that the NHS is not in a good state and was in a bad state during COVID. But his key point, actually, was that the NHS had been run down for years before COVID hit, and we knew that. And he has said that the Andrew Lansley reforms, which were introduced, I think, in 2012, have essentially been disastrous for the NHS. And I remember at the time thinking, David Cameron has not... He kind of gave permission. He was, famously hands-off and sort of thought, oh, let Lansley get on with it. And then suddenly it's like, oh, my God, this is a total top-down restructuring. It was extremely unpopular in the NHS, and it cut the NHS to the bone. And we faced the pandemic in a very, very bad state. And if you looked at the time at the number of beds available in different categories compared to in most European countries, they were shockingly low. And then, as we remember, there were all these emergency measures taken. And one of the results was an awful lot of basic healthcare and operations were cancelled and still haven't happened. So the NHS is in a total state, and it's going to be very, very difficult to sort it out.
And Leon, one of the findings is that the health service reduced its routine healthcare activity by a far greater percentage than other health systems. And in many key areas, they talk about the operations that didn't take place and, care that just simply didn't happen.
Yeah, and we all have 20/20 vision in hindsight. And I think at the time when the pandemic first hit, it was all hands on deck and what can we do to ensure the NHS doesn't reach total collapse. So perhaps there was a overreaction, I guess, but ultimately, there wasn't much of a blueprint to work on. But I think we all know there's an issue with the NHS. You alluded to that, Christina. The question I've got, what are the solutions? Because we already spend £3.7 billion on the NHS every single week. How do we put more money into the NHS? Is that the answer? Or is it about reimagining what the service looks like so we can actually get a better service for taxpayers, get a better service for patients, as well as those working in the NHS as well?
Well, that's part of what Wes Streeting is arguing for. He said that we need a different approach. And I have done a lot of work on the NHS in my time, and I've done a lot of campaigning work because I've personally had very, very disappointing experiences in the NHS, particularly, I'm afraid, in relation to nursing. And there was a period of when I had 6 operations in a few years, and I'm afraid some of the care was okay, but some of it really wasn't. And I remember at the time writing for various places like the King's Fund that we needed to focus much more on prevention, that we needed a model of treatment that was much more based in local communities and with GPs in a very collaborative relationship with patients. I mean, they shouldn't be patients, they're just members of the public until they end up in a hospital. And, you know, and we know we've got enormous problems with obesity and diabetes and the chronic illnesses that the NHS was not designed for. So Wes Streeting wants to make those changes and also introduce a much bigger digital component, because we're very, very behind on that. But all of this stuff takes time. He's been in the job for about 5 minutes, and there's an enormous black hole in terms of funding. So, I mean, and also it is a bottomless pit. So you're right on that front, Leon. There are no easy answers, but it does need a different kind of approach, but it's going to be a long-term project.
Which we're yet to hear the detail from Wes Streeting. One of the focuses of the report is on the treatment of children. Leon, more than 100,000 infants left waiting longer than 6 hours to be seen in A&E in England last year. This in the Sunday Telegraph. Yeah,
and I have to say, when I read this story, it did fill me with a bit of terror. I've got a 1-month-old at home, and, you know, the worst thing... Thank you very much. The worst thing in the world you'd want is for your child to fall ill, but not to be accessing the treatment that they require. And I think, you know, the NHS is a big problem for this country. And I think what we need is politicians that have guts to say we are going to change the way in which the NHS is run, is funded, delivers the services that we require. Because, you know, Andrew Lansley's reforms have been slammed in this report, but any reform would be slammed in this report. And I think the NHS is such
I don't think that's true. I don't think you can make that assumption. I mean, we don't know that Lord Darzi is he's a very sensible person, and he's not anti-private healthcare. So I don't think you can assume that any suggestions would be slammed. I mean,
it's always contentious, Christina. Whenever the NHS comes up, you know, the only thing a politician can really do to win votes is say, I'm putting more money into the NHS.
Actually, I think that the Tories have been more cautious about the NHS because they're aware of it as a kind of national religion than Wes Streeting, who is extremely pro-reform and has been very outspoken in his criticism of it. So I'm not sure you're right.
Well, I hope I'm wrong, because, you know, and I'll give Wes Streeting the benefit of the doubt, because, you know, I think the NHS does need reform, but it does take a brave politician to do that. Maybe Labour, with a huge majority, maybe they're well placed to make those reforms that are desperately needed. But this report paints a dire picture, whether you're an infant or whether you're an older person, you know, across the board. It's not working.
Indeed. We've just got time to look at this other Observer story, Christina, on Boris Johnson's and some questions regarding a Uranian lobby link. Failed to disclose that he met a uranium lobbyist while Prime Minister before entering into any business.
I'd love to say this is a shocker, but of course there's nothing shocking about it whatsoever. But it looks as if Boris Johnson had a meeting with a colleague of this person while he was still Prime Minister in relation to this project, to this whole, it's to do with uranium and mining and energy. And the net result appears to be that he has started a company euphemistically called Better Earth Limited, which has very shady, it's, you know, the funding seems to be outside the UK, even though it's a registered UK company. And Charlotte Owen, 29-year-old new Baroness in the House of Lords, controversial appointment, is vice president of this company. So tell me there's nothing fishy going on there.
Very quickly.
I was going to say, every ex-Prime Minister gets their business interests scrutinised.
Not Gordon...
It does smell fishy, I have to say, but I think every Prime Minister does have issues, don't they, when they go into business? Oh,
it doesn't look good, though. You have to admit that, Leon, even as an ex-Tory, it's bad.
Leon and Christina are going to leave you there laughing and still speaking to each other. Coming up, could the Chancellor be planning a welter of tax rises in next month's budget? That story and more coming up.
Evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
Christchurch has been changed forever by what happened here.
There was a river of blood coming out of the mosque. That's a scene that you don't forget.
Ida has certainly left its mark on New Orleans.
It just feels heartbreaking.
We help you understand the world with us. We are standing on the supply line right into the heart of America's opioid crisis. I've reported from around the world and around the UK. Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who've made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Joe Biden knows the celebrations are over and this is a country in crisis.
You don't want to be remembered this way. You always want to be remembered as something positive.
It is almost impossible to predict where these fires will go next. This gives you an idea of the strength of those winds, strong enough to bend and twist metal.
Do you regret the tweet, Gary?
There's no sign, publicly at least, of either side being willing to give ground. How do you reassure the public that all of these mistakes wouldn't be made again? I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Leon Emirali and Christina Patterson. Welcome back. Let's start off by looking at the Express and this story on the winter fuel storm, as it's being described, that's facing Labour, being described as Margaret Thatcher's poll tax moment. Christina.
Yes, well, it has not gone down well, I think we can safely say, and people like Martin Lewis have spoken out against it, and he's made a recommendation about something that could be done to do with council tax levels that he thinks would solve the problem for the people who are likely to suffer most severely. But I mean, this one is very difficult because clearly Labour are going to have to make all kinds of decisions like this if they're going to stick to their spending promises. And they have been left a terrible mess, as they keep telling us, but it is also true. And it also looks as if some people will be really struggling to pay their fuel bills without the subsidy that they're losing. So I suspect there will be some kind of climb down on this in the budget.
What do you think?
I'm not sure. I don't think it will be I don't know. I don't think it. If it happens, I don't think it'll be presented as a climb down. I think there'll be possibly some extra measure announced that will deal with the worst of it. I don't know, but I think it's not a great start.
Well, Leon, Keir Starmer's been trying to kind of stave off a rebellion. Our political correspondent John Cogue was saying that the suspicions could be up to 30 in the vote this week. But, you know, talking about housing benefits increase, credits, pensions could go up, and these will counter the effects of the winter fuel allowance being cut for some people.
Yeah, I think what's happening is you've got 231 new Labour MPs, and they're suddenly getting a deluge of angry messages in their inbox saying, I'm not happy with this, and you know, pensioners and a raft of other issues that are going to be difficult decisions. And I think that rebellion is being driven by those new MPs. But they're going to have to get used to it, because it is a difficult economic inheritance. There's no denying that. And there is going to be some difficult decisions. But ultimately, this is going to be a political problem, I think, for Starmer, because if there are pensioners who, you know, God forbid, but die over the winter because of the cold weather or whatever, it might be a difficult winter, this is going to come back to bite them. And there has to be a logical reason as to why this is happening, why the fuel tax is being cut. I don't think it's at the scale of the poll tax. I think that's a Sunday Express being slightly frivolous. But there is a lot of discontent out there, and there's a lot of voters, former Tory voters, perhaps pensioners, who voted Labour for the first time in July, and they'll be looking at this thinking, well, this wasn't necessarily on the cards when I voted for Labour, and are they being disingenuous, perhaps?
Christina, is it unfair to make it means-tested? I mean, there are some pensioners who really don't need it.
You know what? No, I don't think it is unfair to make it means-tested. And broadly, I mean, I'm not in favour of people, you know, making anybody poorer, but broadly, I think that I think pensioners generally... There are a lot of very poor pensioners, but I think that if there is one demographic in this country that has not done particularly badly in recent years in terms of what the Tory government has been giving them, not least because they are more likely to vote Tory, it is that demographic. So I'm not against it being means-tested, but I think there should, you know, they will need to... Apparently, a lot of people are not aware of the pension credit they can claim, so there would need to be much better measures taken to communicate to people what they are entitled to. So I'm not anti-means testing, but I do think they're going to have to do something to make sure that some very poor people don't really suffer.
Meanwhile, Leon, the Mail warning of multiple tax raid by the new Chancellor, Rachel Reeves.
Yeah, and, you know, I think we did see this coming. We heard the Chancellor and the Prime Minister say during the election campaign, no tax rises on working people. Well, they're looking at taxing non-working, or raising non-working taxes, shall we say. There is a lot of millionaires, 9,000 millionaires reported to be looking at leaving the country. That's a small figure when you look at actually there's more than, you know, 2-point-something million millionaires in the country overall. But there is a risk that if these taxes continue to rise, and they rise in a particularly significant way, that the UK sends a message outwardly, globally, that we aren't open for business, that we aren't the type of country that allows people to succeed and enjoy their wealth. And I think there has to be a balance where the Chancellor says, look, we are going to have to raise taxes, but we're also going to try and grow the economy as well.
Leon and Christina, we're going to have to leave it there. We've run out of time, but you'll have much more opportunity in the 11 o'clock hour. Coming up next on Sky News at 11, the US and UK spy chiefs appear together for the first time.